Greetings, fellow snowflakes. It's unfortunate that one of the casualties of the culture wars between feminists and anti-feminists, SJWs and anti-SJWs, has been acceptance of transgender people and the struggle for transgender rights. Obviously, this affects me personally. And it's unfortunate that the recent exposure of transgender identities and personalities in the mainstream media, thanks in part to celebrities such as Caitlyn Jenner and the very wonderful Laverne Cox, as well as TV shows centred on trans issues or featuring prominent transgender characters such as Orange is the New Black, Sense8, Transparent, etc., it's unfortunate that these positive developments have also resulted in a backlash of incredulity from certain people, a widespread hatred of non-binary identity, and a kind of moral panic about who gets to go to which toilet. A lot of people, especially online, seem to want to express their opinions about gender as if they are fact. So I've responded to this by being determined to do the same. I decided to get my head straight about what I really feel about gender, to reach for a kind of rock-solid certainty of my own, and to unapologetically state it, as arrogantly and confidently as everyone else seems to want to.
I don't need no good advice, I'm already wasted. I don't need some other life, cold and complicated. I don't need no Sunday tricks, tea and sympathizing. I don't need no special face to anesthetize me.
Riley Dennis actually made a fairly decent point about the studies into neurological differences between men and women. There does seem to be significant overlap. There also is the matter of plasticity, that the brain can be formed by your experiences anyway. This kind of means that the brain evidence only gets us so far. The jury is still out. There's still a lot of uncertainty. So here goes. This is what I think about gender. Those who follow my Twitter may already have heard this stuff from me. Anatomical sex is simply anatomical sex. What gonads, genitals or secondary sex characteristics you have is simply that. It does not really give you any other information about the person than what body they happen to have. The rest of it, what we might want to distinguish from biological sex and call gender, is really a kind of social game that we play. In the past, people decided not only that males tend to be more likely to be a certain way and females tend to be more likely to be another way, but also that we should enforce various extra rules about how men and women should interact with one another, the social roles they can play, and even how they dress. Those extra rules are not even based on nature, and even the trends or tendencies are simply trends and tendencies and do not hold true in every case. And yet society decided to unfairly impose these stereotypes and expectations on people based solely on what biological sex they are, what their anatomy is. It's unfair precisely because it does not hold in every case, and anatomy only really tells you about anatomy, not anything else. Yet it's true that hormones, and maybe neurology, leads to some of those trends and tendencies. But they are trends. They are not absolutes, and exceptions are myriad. So gender is largely based on unfair assumptions based on sex. A lot of people conclude that gender is based on sex, and leave it at that. But they are leaving out a very important link in the chain, that gender is based on unfair assumptions applied to a person's sex. Given the above, that gender is a social game based on unfair assumptions, it is absolutely valid and rational if someone decides that they are not happy living as a man, so would rather live as a woman, or that they are not happy living as a woman, so would rather live as a man. It also makes sense if someone decides they don't want to play the game of gender at all, and wishes to opt out of it altogether. Yes, it's true that we have remodeled society to have a less stereotyped idea about what men and women can be, and this is positive change, but there are still all kinds of subtle ways that we interact differently with men and with women. There is still a social game that we play, and it's still based on unfair assumptions about sex and a whole lot of extra rules that we arbitrarily apply to gender. When something so hugely unfair and inaccurate, even in some senses fictional, is imposed on people, then why can't those who feel uncomfortable with it consent to a change of gender or to refusing to play along at all? In that sense, trans and non-binary is absolutely valid. Say what you like about society shouldn't be based on stereotypes, but we don't live in that world yet. And enough people seem to enjoy social gender or feel that we need to construct our lives that way that we probably never will or never can achieve that genderless utopia that radfems rant about. It's only humane and compassionate to let people negotiate their position with regards to a game that has no basis in fact but with huge impact on people's comfort and well-being. And all the only two genders, when you really mean sex, not gender, doesn't change the fact that the social game of gender is actually a social convention and not ultimately real. That's the social side of the transgender issue. The other side is biological. I think it's clear from physical dysphoria, its manifestations and how deep-seated it often is, that it's not actually informed by social ideas about gender. Although there may be elements of it that are, those who experience it know that at its root it seems to be caused by something innate. I, for example, didn't like my body hair and felt self-conscious about my chest from my teenage years. I've also had my sexual problems around penis and vagina sex from as long as I can remember. And by the way, I have discovered that it helps me enjoy it when I'm inside her if I imagine that I have a vagina and she is penetrating me. How can that not be an aspect of body dysphoria? Those things existed before I even identified as anything other than a guy, so how could they be caused by social ideas about gender? Those feelings conflicted with what I thought my gender was. I think the only logical thing to conclude from this is that although the jury is still out on the brain evidence, there must be something in the brain that at least tells you what body you're supposed to be in. And it can conflict with what body you actually have. But that's it. I don't think there's necessarily any evidence that there's anything else to brain gender than that. Maybe it only affects how you feel about your body and nothing else. I don't really believe in an essentialist gender in your head. I think what might seem like that is actually a reflection of your own philosophy about gender. I thought I was a boy, because it was that long ago. Then I thought that guys and girls are essentially the same underneath, and so being a guy was only an external factor, and my true self was genderless, like everybody else's. Then when I learned about non-binary and heard the term genderqueer, I leapt on it as an explanation of what I am, especially as I was eager not to delegitimize trans women or trans men and what they experience about their gender. If I accepted that people have a sense of gender in their head, then it was clear by the same logic that I didn't, and so was neither cis nor trans, but non-binary. Later, though, I experienced how I felt when people gendered me as female, and also started being honest with myself about how I felt about my own body, so I reasoned that I needed to live as a woman, and declared that I am a trans woman. Now I realise that I don't believe in an essentialist notion of gender anyway, and that I have always been non-binary in my mind, but that I also have a practical need to transition to being socially and hormonally female. I think it's clear from my story, the many apparently cisgender people that proclaim that they don't feel like men or women really, and the reality of the many closeted and confused people out there, that what gender you think or feel you are is really nothing else than a reflection of your own personal philosophy about gender. Perhaps men and women aren't so dissimilar really. But gender is a social game based on unfair assumptions. People can and should negotiate themselves out of the box that they've been placed in. And if they need to change their body too, then that's their right. It's their body. It shouldn't really be such a big deal, especially to those who don't even view gender as ultimately real. I don't understand TERFs, because if what you believe about gender is really true, then why does it even matter what people do? People have fear and stigma around this also because of sexuality and fear of being turned straight or becoming gay. But gay and straight are labels. The reality is, if you are turned on by someone sexually and so you want to be sexual with them, then there's no reason to place a value judgment over that. Do what you want to do, and with whoever you want to do it with. If they're game and you're game, then who cares? And who cares if you want to do all the making out stuff but don't want any genital touching with them? It's still no reason to freak out about what you did want to do. To place value judgments on what you yourself want to do with someone is to say there is something wrong with being gay or with being straight. But if there's nothing wrong with any of it, it's just the way you are, then who cares? Society needs to get over this. Your anatomical sex only determines your anatomical sex, nothing else. There's no need to interact with people in different ways because of sexist assumptions. But while we are still playing that social game, then where's the harm in letting people do whatever they need to do to be happy? That's all. Thanks for watching. We're all different. We're all special. Snowflakes unite.